Hello, my name is Marianne and I'm an alcoholic. I'd like to welcome you to Recovery in Action, Life on Life's Terms. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We're glad you're all here, especially newcomers. In keeping with our singleness of purpose and our third tradition, which states that the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking, we ask that all who participate confine their discussion to their problems with alcohol. This is an open Big Book step study meeting where we discuss the 12 steps of recovery as they're written in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, with the focus on their application in everyday life and recovery. This is the second session of the sixth cycle of the workshop that was presented on May 4th, 2024, where we completed steps 1 and 2. Next week, we'll start on step 3. If you would like to contribute to the seventh tradition, you may do so using the QR codes displayed. Contributions are applied towards the group's expenses and support our service offices. Recordings of the workshop are available, and if you would like to be placed on the distribution list, please send an email to recoveryinaction462@gmail.com to receive the links. These links are unlisted and not public. I request that you not share them at the public level or post on any social media sites. The workshop typically begins with a brief meditation in which an inspirational music video is played. Because of copyright restrictions, it cannot be on the video. However, a link is provided, and I suggest you take a minute, view the video, and take a brief meditation for yourself before you begin the workshop. As the recording begins, the workshop is already in session. Feel free to contact me if you have any additional questions or require my assistance further. I hope you enjoy the workshop. Another custom of this group is to start the workshop by saying the full version of the Serenity Prayer. We're all familiar with the first part, but many of us are unaware that there is a second part to it, and I believe it's this second part of the prayer that reflects what recovery is all about. So if you would all please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking as he did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. So we are in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the whole idea of the Big Book, the main purpose of the Big Book, and the reason why the Big Book was written was to instruct alcoholics on how to work the 12 steps in order to get sober. And basically the 12 steps are the set of instructions that help us get rid of the things that are blocking us off from our higher power. So it's how to get connected to God and how to stay surrendered from alcohol making our lives unmanageable. So, but what we need to realize, and this was one of the many mistakes that I made for many years, is that just reading the Big Book without experiencing it is really useless, because you can't learn how to swim without jumping in the water. You can't learn how to live spiritually by just reading the book. You need to continually practice and practice and practice. So, when what we started last week, it was our first session. So we kind of went over a very high level overview of everything that is in the Big Book, but to just keep things on the common track, what we're and just as to keep it in front of us, we have to remember that the cover page of the Big Book states that this is the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. And you will hear a lot of controversy in the rooms, but so far I haven't been able to find anywhere
in the big book where it uses the term recovering. It uses the word recovered a lot, but we focus on that we have recovered from alcoholism. And the definition of recovered is that the problem is removed. I don't have to make a choice as to whether I drink or not because I don't even think about drinking. I automatically turn to God instead of alcohol when I'm upset. Alcohol is no longer an option to solve any of my problems. Selfishness and self centeredness are gone. Therefore, I'm no longer angry, fearful, or harmful, and my old destructive ways of thinking and acting have been replaced by new and peaceful ones. And then another definition is in the 10th step promise, which is also on page 84. And this 10th step promise is now a way of life where it states, and we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol, for by this time sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That's the miracle of it. We're not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we had been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We've not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. That's our experience. That's how we react, so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. And then another definition is on page 27, which states that ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. And then in the appendix in the spiritual experience, it says that a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. So our personalities will change. And then when we get into the forward to the first edition, it states that we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we recovered is the main purpose of this book. Then it later goes on to say that the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. However, the desire to stop drinking is not the only requirement if we are to become recovered. There's other things involved, such as being willing and actually doing everything that the big book says to do. So last week we did a very high level overview of the book, and then we started at step 1. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. And for those of you who have the workbook and you have the ability to download the questionnaire, we went over the unmanageability questionnaire, which really looks at the unmanageability in our lives. And this questionnaire addresses all of these areas in our life. And it's really helpful. It's a helpful tool that we can use to help us see where there's unmanageability in our life. And this is useful even if we've been in the program for a real long time, or we're at day 1 and we looked at the questions that really based on, am I restless, irritable, which means easily annoyed, and discontent, which means I'm never satisfied. Then we looked at our personal relationships, our emotions, our finances, our fears, our happiness versus our unhappiness. And what are all of these different areas in our life. That unmanageability questionnaire really addresses the things that can really bring us to relapse, because these are looking at those bedevilments, and the bedevilments are the things that there's a relapse under every one of them. So now we finished with that last week. So this week we're actually going to look at the cycle of alcoholism. And we're going to look at the cycle of alcoholism from the approach of how we approach it, from using the tools of the program versus the steps of the program. So basically what happens with me as an alcoholic, I'm an alcoholic and I get these feelings of being restless, irritable, and discontent. I feel shameful. I feel remorseful. I feel guilty. And these feelings are just overwhelming. I don't like these feelings. I want these feelings to go away. And then out of nowhere, I get a memory, and that memory tells me that if I have a drink, I'll feel better. Now, this might be an actual conscious memory of a specific event, or it might be something in my unconscious, but it doesn't matter. One way or the other, my brain gets this memory that tells me if I drink, I'll feel better. Now, as soon as my brain believes this, I start to obsess, and I tell myself, I have to have a drink. I have to have a drink. I have to have a drink. And that obsession is going on and on and on. I can't get it out of my mind. I just tell myself, I've got to have a drink. I want a drink. I want a drink. I want a drink. And I start romanticizing the drink because I'm obsessing about it. And I tell myself, I'll just have one. I just will have one. That's it. Just one will do it. And then I give in and I take that first drink because I'm only going to have one. But as soon as I take that first sip, what happens is the allergy gets triggered and I start to experience the physical craving. Therefore, once those physical cravings start, I have no choice except to keep on drinking until I get drunk. I can't stop because that physical craving starts and I just have no choice. Now, eventually I may stop because I run out of booze, I run out of money, I get sick, I pass out, I get in a fight, I get arrested, I have an accident, something happens that makes me stop. And then I go through and I start making promises to myself. I'm never going to do it again. I'm never going to do it again. I'm never going to do it again. I drank scotch that time, so next time I'll drink bourbon. Or I drank tequila. I can't drink tequila. I'll drink vodka. So I start doing other things because I make myself these promises. And these promises can last anywhere from decades, which is the example that's given in the big book when they give the example of the man of 30 who stopped drinking for 25 years until he retired and then started drinking again. And by the time he started drinking again, he was dead in 4 years. So these promises can last decades, or they can last years, or they can last months, weeks, days, hours, or even seconds. And then what happens is when I start feeling restless, irritable, discontent, shameful, remorseful, guilty, then I pick up again. And I start the cycle over again. And the whole cycle begins again. And I wonder, how did this happen? I wasn't going to do this, but here I am on the bathroom floor with my head in the bowl, puking my guts out. I wasn't going to do that again. I wasn't going to drive. I wasn't going to keep on drinking. I wasn't going to spend all my money. I was going to go home right after work. But the same thing happens. Now, when we come into the program, the first thing they tell us about are the tools of the program. So when the tools of the program are used, they can stop you from taking the first drink and continuing on with the rest of the cycle. And some of those tools are things like the slogans, the Serenity Prayer, don't go drink and go to meetings, go to 90 meetings in 90 days, get a sponsor, join a group, get active, do service work, pick up the phone before picking up the drink, make coffee. And all of these things are good things. But these tools I like to refer to as the handrails of the steps. So whenever we're either walking up or walking down a staircase, doesn't matter, you have the handrails, which sometimes you can have one on either side, sometimes you may only have one. But the handrails, when you're walking up the stairs or down the stairs, they're there for you to grab a hold of to steady yourself so that you can keep your balance and you don't trip and fall and you can continue either up or down the staircase. So therefore, they give you something to do other than picking up the first drink, which of course eliminates the next two steps in the cycle of alcoholism, which is triggering the craving and the drinking binges. However, it's important to be aware that using the tools does not mean that I'm recovered. It just means that I haven't picked up a drink. I have not triggered the physical cravings because I haven't picked up the drink, but that doesn't mean that I'm recovered. In fact, if I'm a real alcoholic, the tools may not keep me sober when I'm blindsided by some life event or my ego gets hit hard. The tools are for the short term to get you over some of life's tough hurdles. The 12 steps are for the long haul. So that when the 12 steps are used, they stop me from believing that a drink is my solution and the cycle of alcoholism doesn't even begin. The 12 steps allow me to stop or short circuit the negative feelings before my brain tells me I need a drink to numb those feelings away. So when the 12 steps are used, especially step 10, which changes my reactions, and step 11, which guides me towards behaviors that don't cause negative feelings, the obsession never has a chance to materialize. So on the other side of step 12, my thought process has changed so dramatically that negative feelings are just fleeting thoughts that disappear immediately. So in order to have the obsession removed, it's important to remember, number one, AA is a 12-step program. It's not a tools program. Sometimes we refer to that as white knuckling it. We're just not drinking. I can remember even when I was brand new, when they would talk about white knuckling it, I could see myself sitting at a bar, gripping the bar rail with a drink in front of me and just, I'm not drinking it. That's a miserable way to live. I don't want to have to live that way. I don't want to have to be white knuckling it and be under all that kind of stress all the time. Additionally, there's 12 steps and not just the first 3. If we didn't, if just not drinking were what it took, then we'd only have 3 steps, but we have 12 steps. And those 12 steps are what helps us to become recovered. Okay, so once we are really looking at this process as to what is the cycle of alcoholism, it helps to understand and explain why alcoholism is a disease and not just a lack of willpower. And basically, that comes down to looking at the difference between having a choice and having a disease. So, because it's important to understand what the difference is. And with choice, there is free will, there's responsibility. I can stop. Things like punishment and coercion do work, and it involves behaviors. So, for example, someone who's not an alcoholic, who maybe just had a couple too many drinks and got stopped by a police officer and got a DWI, punishment and coercion do work. They're going to say, hey, I'm never going to drink and drive again. And they don't. But for us alcoholics, again, when it's a disease, there is no free will. There is no responsibility. I can't stop, and punishment and coercion do not work. And there are symptoms involved when we talk about a disease. Because when we're discussing a disease is when there's some organ of the body that's affected by a defect, and then it's accompanied by symptoms. So, just using as an example, based on the disease model, diabetes is considered a disease. The organ involved is the pancreas. And the defect is that it has a problem producing insulin. And the symptoms are things like elevated blood glucose, blurred vision, infections, damaged nerve endings, and or coma, and or death. Alcoholism fits the disease model because the organ affected is the midbrain. The defect is a stress-induced hedonic dysregulation, which means that the fight or flight response that's the lower part of the brain stem here, the reptilian brain, is what manages that. But the fight or flight response gets triggered too easily, and the threshold in the pleasure center is higher than it should be. So the symptoms are loss of control, obsession, persistent use despite negative consequences. And the big book does state that the disease centers in the brain. And while we may want to find different things to blame for our addiction, scientific evidence supports the theory. And just as an aside, I actually, a couple of years back, I remember I worked in a couple of colleges. So I had asked one of the research librarians to see if there were any articles on a stress-induced hedonic dysregulation. And believe it or not, she was able to get me a couple of articles that if anybody wants to really look into this and research it and have the medical evidence of what a stress-induced hedonic dysregulation is. I have a couple of articles there at a very, very high level, lots of medical ease and stuff, but I do have them if there's anyone who wants to read them, if they're really into, if you want to read, you just catch me offline, and I'm more than happy to share those articles with you. But there is scientific evidence to support the theory and, of course, the terminology. Now, when the book was written back in 1939, this research didn't exist, but we in the last decades, over the years, there's been a lot more work done in the scientific community. But to get back to this, years ago, scientists did experiments with mice, and the mice were trained to press a lever, and it had the pleasure center of their brain stimulated by they got the food, which made them feel good, which gave them pleasure. So the mice did nothing but press the lever, even when they started to experience negative consequences of an electric shock every time they pressed the lever. They didn't care about getting the electric shock. They just wanted to get the pellet, which stimulated the pleasure center in their brains. There was nothing other than their brains that made them do this. So when we think about our brains, what's happening in our brains is that at some point in our life, we discovered that if we were stressed or unhappy, a drink would make us feel better. Remember, in that cycle, there was a point in our life we discovered that a drink made us feel better. And this happened so often that eventually a dopamine connection was made between the decision making and the survival parts of the brain. So um, it's the same as if a wild animal was barreling towards you. You automatically react to save your life by jumping out of the way without having to think about it. Let me move my left leg, let me move my right leg. It's an automatic response. And that's the same with alcoholic drinking, in that it's just something that we automatically do. It's the fight or flight response, which that fight or flight response is the survival response. Um, we react in the way we react because we believe that our life is in danger and we have to do this to save our life. So we misinterpret our perception of what's going on as life threatening, and we run to alcohol for comfort. So what makes us real alcoholics is that there's no reason that can make us moderate or stop for good. When our brains believe that we're in danger and that a drink is the only solution, our our prior commitment to quit or any memory of what happened the last time we drank, the love we feel for our family, the knowledge of the punishment or the humiliation we know awaits us if we relapse, all of these are invisible when the decision making part of our brains fails to be able to stop the midbrain from thinking that we have to pick up the drink in order to save our life. The once that fight or flight response gets triggered, we go into survival mode. And when we're in survival mode, we can't think of anything else. So the next thing that happens is the obsession. As alcoholics, our brains evoke a powerful function that sustains its connection of our drinking to our survival, called obsessing. Obsessing can be a difficult concept because when a normal drinker says they need a drink, what they really mean is that they really want a drink really bad. It's important to understand that this is not what the alcoholic means when they say they need a drink. Obsession is an intense emotional yearning experience. We want to think about other things, but our brain is constantly bringing us back to the drink. I've got to have a drink. I've got to have a drink. I've got to have a drink. I try to do something else, but that drink just keeps popping up. So when obsession is present, choice is impossible. So if you take alcohol and you put it in front of an alcoholic, and when he reaches for it, you put a gun to his head and you tell him that if he drinks, you're going to shoot him. Based on that, he will choose not to drink. And that's true. You put a gun to your head, they're going to say, oops, nope, I'm not going to do it. The alcoholic can, in that moment, choose not to drink. But while the alcoholic is not drinking, he's still obsessing. He doesn't have a choice not to obsess. And because of the obsession, the alcoholic is not thinking, oh, I better not drink or I'll get shot in the head. No, what he thinks is more like this. I wonder if he will really shoot me. I wonder if he even has bullets in that gun. Maybe his finger will slip off the trigger. I wonder if I can get that drink down before the bullet comes out and crashes through my skull, or something to that effect. The alcoholic is still obsessing, even with being restrained. The obsession and that experience, as miserable as it is involuntary. But even knowing all this will not change anything. As it's written in the big book, self-knowledge is not the answer, because the real alcoholic will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. It's not enough for me to know this about myself. As a real alcoholic, the only thing self-knowledge does is make me realize that I cannot take just one drink without being physically driven to take one drink after the other. This then allows me the opportunity, if I'm spiritually fit, to pass on that first drink. And I can only do this on a continuous basis if I'm connected to my higher power. And Bill Wilson learned this on many occasions. There was the one occasion where he was supposed to go play golf. I think it was on Staten Island, and the bus broke down, and he struck up a conversation with the guy on the bus next to him, and they went into the bar. I think they had lunch or something, and Bill was telling him how he learned all this stuff about himself, and they were there for a while. And eventually, as the guy was having a drink, eventually Bill broke down and he took a drink, and the guy said to him, "Wow, after what you just told me, you've got to be crazy for taking that drink." And he goes, "Yeah, I guess I am." And he started drinking again. And then there was there were a couple examples with, there was the Jersey Lightning story where he was told that he had a lucrative business opportunity where he had to sign this agreement where he would not drink, and everything was going well, and the people that were there were passing around this bottle of some kind of, they called it Jersey Lightning. It was some kind of whiskey, and a couple of times it went past him and he was okay. And then there was the one time when it went past him where all of a sudden it pops in the head, the rationalization: "I never had Jersey Lightning before. You know, I'll try that." And then before you knew it, he was drunk and he lost that business opportunity. And he knew in both of those instances, he knew that he couldn't drink. But it didn't matter, because self-knowledge is not enough. That finishes up the first step, and it brings us now to the second step. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And that brings us back to the workbook. If we go into the workbook on pages 104 to and 105, let me turn those pages. And to start with the second step, I'm more thumbs here today. All right, so on pages 104 and 105, there's really some thought-provoking questions on pages 104 and 105. And that's a very liberating part of this program, because we don't have to use someone else's concept of a higher power. We can come up with our own. And our higher power can change over time. So when we go into the workbook, and I know some of us, I mean, for myself, I've already shared with you what my religious beliefs are, and we all may have differing religious beliefs or no religious beliefs, but the one thing that's beautiful about AA is that we can come up with our own concept of our higher power. So if we go to pages 104 and 105 in the workbook that you can download, um, there is an assignment, which is the step 2 exercise, which is questions on a higher power. If you're really not clear on what your higher power is, and I know even for myself, I mean, I always had a sense of who my higher power was, but these questions actually helped me to kind of firm up and understand the power of my higher power. So if we look at the first question, it states, if you were to become paralyzed and had to hire someone to take care of you, what qualities would you want that person to have? And then you can write down those qualities. You know, I would want that person to be someone who is caring, who's empathetic, who's non-judgmental. Uh, these are things that I would want because they're going to have to take care of me. And in some intimate ways in which I can't really take care of myself. They're going to have to help take care of my personal hygiene, the way I work, because I'm completely incapacitated. Um, and you know, I always remember there was this woman, she was an evangelist, her name was Johnny Erickson Tata, and she was a paraplegic from when she was a teenager. She dove into what she thought was deep water, and it turned out to be shallow water. And she hit her head at the bottom and broke her neck. And for the rest of her life, she was a paraplegic. So she had to have people who took care of her. And I often think, like, you know, what would I want from someone like that? So I would want them to be caring. I would want them to be loving. I would want them to be very open-minded. And also, I would want them to be very prudent in things that they share. So all of those, because they have to take care of me because I can't take care of myself. So I would write those down in the area that is provided there. And then the second question is, you're about to be born and you're given the opportunity to describe the woman who's to be your mother. What qualities would you want her to have? And of course, I would want a mother who is loving and caring and willing to take care of me in ways that I need to be taken care of, until someone who is going to teach me what I need to do, someone who has a strong moral character, who's going to teach me the right way to do things. And then the next question is the same question about your father. What qualities would you want your father to have? You know, I would want him to be strong. I would want him to be honest. All of those things, I would want to write those things down. And then the next question is, what things have you seen in your life that you would classify as a miracle? What things have you seen that have inspired awe in you? So, of course, you know, one of the first things I would say as a miracle is this program, just looking at and understanding the history of this program, how this program just came about, all of the different uh, scenarios that had to be just so. You had Roland Hazard had to go to Carl Jung, and he had to get drunk on that train heading back to Paris and going back to Jung and saying and asking him, hey, you know, are there any exceptions? And then Jung had to say, well, sometimes people have a spiritual experience. So then Roland Hazard comes back to the United States and gets involved in the Oxford groups. And then Eddie is going to court and they're going to put him away. And Roland Hazard and his friends show up in court and they get Eddie out and they bring him into the Oxford group. And then Eddie is told he's got 2 months sobriety under his belt. He's told he's got to carry the message. So who does he think of? He thinks of Bill. And Bill just happened to be there. So when Eddie came to carry the message to him, and Bill just happened to be at such a rock bottom place where he was open to hearing the solution. And I mean, that just in and of itself is a miracle. And then I think of so many other miracles that have just happened in my life, happened in the program. The fact that I'm still alive, I mean, I beat cancer twice. That wasn't me. That was God working in my life because I guess he just wanted me to do this. But there's a lot of things that really could be classified as miracles. So this is the area where you can write that down. And then the next question is to think about how the world was created. What qualities do you think this power, thing, or person had in order to do that? And then write that down, whatever it might be for you. And then go back and look at what you've written as your answers for all of the questions. And using those answers, what qualities would you like your higher power to have? And then write those down. And your responses to those questions can provide you with the framework to begin thinking about the characteristics, your understanding of what the higher power is to you. And I think that that's something that's very personal and to each individual. But this particular activity can really give you some concepts if you're struggling with that. I know for myself, I already knew who my higher power was, but going through these questions really helped me to see my higher power in a different light, to see that that's what he was there to do, those things for me. So many of those things I thought I had to do for myself. And again, our higher power can change over time. I mean, I've heard people say things like some people when they see God kind of as the equivalent of a loving parent, and they're a little 2-year-old sitting in a car seat in the back seat of the car, and God's the driver, and they're just a little. And I always think about that. I remember my kids and my grandkids when they were little, and they'd be in the back seat sitting in the car seat just kind of looking around, just checking everything out, watching the scenery. And they just had no problem with where they were being taken because they knew that they were loved and they were cared for and they felt safe. But then again, as we grow, just like any 2-year-old, we have to learn to walk and talk. But when we think of ourselves as a little child, we know that our higher power is going to be there to help us. Like when we're learning to walk and we fall down, our higher power picks us up and helps us to learn how to balance and how to take care of ourselves. But we do learn and grow as we grow in our recovery. Sometimes the concept of a loving parent can have human limitations, and another example of a higher power is that the higher power is all love with no opposite, all powerful, and loving enough to not only put the whole universe together, but also to set up the rules and the regulations of governing how it works. So, for example, if we think about water, All right, water as an example. God, for example, made hydrogen and oxygen and put them together in a way that make the elements water. But he also set up the rules that govern these elements. Because when water is too hot, it's a gas. When it's a regular temperature, it's liquid. And when it's too cold, it's a solid, but it's still water. And it's just becoming what it's meant to be at the exact moment based on God's rules and regulations. So it's kind of like the same with our higher power. Our higher power can put us in situations he wants us to be in and then guides us to do his will, no matter what form that takes. We're still who we are. So when we think about the 12 steps, well, what does the 12 steps, this is just an example. What the 12, if you ask ourselves what the 12 steps have to say about who or what your higher power should be, it's really absolutely nothing, because it's God as each of us understands God. So the success of working the steps is not dependent upon any theological proposition. Rather, it's dependent on you finding something greater than yourself to whom you can be surrendered. For some of us, God is the God found in our respective scriptures. For others, God is nature, spirit, or even the principles of the 12 steps themselves. Some of us can have a clear image of a specific God, while others have a vague sense of something greater and unattached to any religion. The point is, for 12-step recovery, it doesn't matter. God is whatever you need God to be in order to get beyond the insanity ruling your life. Okay, so the only requirement for step 2 is to answer yes to the following question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than me that can solve my problem? If you say yes, you're done with step 2. If you say no, you keep looking for things you think are miracles and ask yourself, well, who made this? Who did that? Then let whatever your answer be your first concept of a higher power. One person said something makes the sun rise every morning and set at night. Why not let that be my higher power? Um, and again, you want to choose your conception of a higher power, and I think that that's the one thing that's really important. One thing we always have to remember is that 12-step recovery, the 12 steps of recovery, are not self-help. At the root of self-help is the notion that I can help myself. At the root of the 12 steps is the notion I can't help myself, and trying to do so only gets me deeper into my alcoholism. So the key to the program is that it has nothing to do with me and my will, and everything to do with God as I understand God, and my being surrendered to God. So when I truly hit rock bottom, when I can do nothing to change my situation and I simply just howl in anguish and pain, then and only then am I willing to surrender to God. Real faith, the kind of faith that will get you working the 12 steps forever, requires hitting rock bottom and hitting it hard. So it's important to understand that you cannot do anything to make yourself believe in a higher power who can restore you to sanity. However, as the rest of the steps will confirm, you can experience that higher power and come to believe as a result of that experience. So that's finishing up step 2.
Thank you so much for your participation. I hope you enjoyed the workshop, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. And now, please join me in our closing prayer, which is St. Faustina's prayer for mercy. Eternal God, in whom mercy is endless and the treasury of compassion inexhaustible, Look kindly upon us and increase your mercy in us, that in difficult moments we might not despair nor become despondent, but with great confidence submit ourselves to your holy will, which is love and mercy itself. Amen.